Okay, we're gonna go ahead and start. Good afternoon. My name is Debbie Swartz, and on behalf of the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh, I would like to welcome you to our commemorative Torah study session. Today, we honor the lives lost and the people affected by the attack on three congregations, Dor Hadash, New Light, and Tree of Life or L'Simcha, on October 27th, 2018. The 18th of Cheshvan, 5779. Our Torah study today is dedicated in memory of the 11 people who perished on this day 3 years ago. Please rise if you are able as we recite their names. Joyce Feinberg, Edith Baltcha Bat Abba Menachem, Richard Gottfried, Yosef Ben Chaim, Rose Mallinger, Razel Bat Avraham, Jerry Rabinowitz, Yehuda Ben Yechezkel Beselma, Cecil Rosenthal, Sissel Chaim Ben Eliezer, David Rosenthal, David Ben Eliezer, Bernice Simon, Bela Rachel Bat Moshe, Sylvan Simon, Zalman Shachna Ben Menachem Mendel, Daniel Stein, Daniel Avraham Ben Baruch, Melvin Wax, Moshe Gadol Ben Yosef, and Irving Younger, Yitzchak Chaim Ben Menachem. Zichronam Livracha, may their memories be a blessing. You may be seated. If there are any members of the press here, please note that this session is off the record. And I now invite Eric Leachy, director of the Rao Jewish Archives, to introduce our scholar, Rabbi Yonasan Meadows. Eric?
Thank you, Debbie. Rabbi Yonasan Meadows is a staff chaplain in the intensive care units of a trauma center in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and an Orthodox rabbi. His training and experience as a clinician and educator across the fields of rabbinics, chaplaincy, social work, and psychology were the foundation of his work with the Pittsburgh Jewish community shortly after the synagogue shooting. He is married to his wife of 25 years, Michelle, a human resources manager, and is the proud father of 6 highly resilient children. Rabbi Meadows, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It is an honor is really too weak a word. Before I continue, Michal Evan is posting the sources for this talk in the chat. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to all of them, but the sources are listed, and these are Torah sources and one psychoanalytic source that are very, very near and dear to my heart. And I wanted to make sure that people had the sources of the Torah study that we're going to be sharing now today. This talk really goes to the heart of my experiences with your beautiful, beloved community, the privilege that I had to do the work that I did shortly after what happened on that fateful day, 18th of Cheshvan, 3 years ago. And there's always been something very profound, I believe, about the concept of resilience within the Jewish community, and something that I believe to be fairly unique. So the title of my talk today is Resilience as Identity. Our journey is a people from brokenness to building. So I would like to begin, first of all, what is resilience? I think resilience is one of those words that people love to use and love to quote, but I feel like we often don't see it defined. And I looked at many definitions, and the one that I settled on was from an article published by the American Psychological Association in 2012. And it defines resilience as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. And the reason why I really resonated with that definition of resilience, especially in the context of the Torah that we're about to jointly experience right now and to just share and to learn together, is that I think inherent in that definition is a definition of resilience as really being part of the capacity to bounce back, to respond in ways that enable survival, and in many cases, even growth after experiencing adverse events. And over the course of my work of 10 years as a chaplain in many, many different settings, but mostly in acute care and hospitals. I'm currently an ICU chaplain at a trauma hospital in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I have often meditated on, reflected on the difference between understanding traumatic collective experiences as they can either be seen as an aberration in history, something where, let's say, a group of people is doing fine, and then all of a sudden something happens that is traumatic, that is terrible, that is an aberration in that path. And the response of that community is to try to correct it and move past that aberration as quickly as possible. Versus understanding those experiences, both as individuals and as a collective, as a people, as being an integral part of the formative process of that people's identity and of the individuals in it. I'm going to say that again. The difference between seeing, going through these experiences as aberrations in history, or do they really speak to who we are, both as individuals and as a people? And before we start exploring this further, I want to say with the strongest possible emphasis, as someone who was present in your community shortly after the events of that fateful day 3 years ago, this is not to say, and this applies to everything we're talking about today, this is not to say in any way, shape, or form that traumatic experiences are ever justified or wanted. An evil act is quite simply an evil act, no matter what. I want to make that perfectly clear. That having been said, Torah, as I have learned it, includes in many places the idea that beginning all the way back in Egypt, beginning at the very creation of us as a people, the experiences we went through, both individually and collectively, molded who we are. And this is present in many, many sources. Those experiences that we went through, many of whom were traumatic, molded who we are into the nation that was to receive and to keep the Torah. And today I want to really focus on two important areas where I believe this has been the case. One, an emphasis on creating and fostering empathy as an integral part of our identity as a people and as a survival mechanism. And also an emphasis on going beyond simply avoiding or negating something traumatic to transformation. So these two areas, one looking at the centrality of empathy in our culture, and the second one being to be able to look through or look beyond simply trying to avoid or to trying to negate experiences we've gone through as a people, to actually being able to transform aspects of those experiences. Okay. And if it wasn't clear before, please, I'm used to teaching Torah in the synagogue where I attend, where I am interrupted, and it is very much a dialogue and not a monologue. So please, at any point, feel free to unmute yourselves and ask a question. because that is certainly how I believe Torah should be learned. Table, you have a question?
Actually, it's Tybal, but close enough, the
Tybal.
Yiddish. And if you don't want to go there, I totally get it. But as you were talking about empathy, I don't know why it made me think of the 10th mitzvah in the Decalogue,
Okay.
which isn't about action. It's the one about how one feels. And I wonder if in your mind there's any connection with that and learning empathy.
What an interesting question. That is a great question. Could we hold that? And as we proceed together through what we're learning, I have a feeling we might address that. But thank you. I think that's a great question. Marty.
Thank you, Rabbi Meadows. I wonder if you're going to give over any thoughts on how the various ways this appears in Gomorrah. I mean, we have a number of Daf Yomi learners here, and also just one thing I've been struck by doing Daf Yomi and covering so much ground is it really does seem in many places, either explicitly or implicitly, there is this horrible, horrible trauma of the Churban and everything that accompanied it, and this almost, again, sometimes it's explicit, sometimes it's not, far beneath the surface, this desperate need to make something of this and transform tragedy into something meaningful. And it feels like if Chazal hadn't done that, perhaps we wouldn't be here today as Jews talking about that. So I'll stop throwing out my pet theory and let you respond.
So the first source actually I have to bring is from the Gemara. So the answer to your first question is yes. The Churban, I think, is I didn't even really, that's not even part of the sources, or at least directly part of the sources that I brought today. Absolutely. And one of the reasons why the Jewish group, in my estimation, the Jewish group that survived, the Prushim, the Pharisees, and all the other Jewish groups really died out, was the Prushim sought to reinterpret all of reality around them as holding the possibilities being vehicles for connection to God and of holiness. But this ability to reinterpret, I think, was absolutely essential, because all the other groups really depended upon the temple, the Beis HaMikdash, as being the focal point that you were interacting with. Once that was gone, they had nowhere to go. The Perushim said, well, we can reinterpret what we're standing on. So I think that we'll be getting to that. Thank you, Rabbi Amy. The Churban means the destruction of the temple in the second temple, usually in the 770 CE, the 70th year of the Common Era. Thank you. Marlene.
Yeah, Rabbi, are you going to try to tell us why all of these things, evil things, happen? I mean, you implied that to make us a better people and to instill empathy, but were we so horrible before that we needed to go through all this? I mean, that's the question, that, why did this happen?
Right. So the short answer to your question is no, absolutely not. I don't presume to understand why these horrible things happened. And I think the Jewish tradition is actually filled with examples of warnings against the dangers of doing that, of ascribing to God reasons for why tragedies happen. I don't know why those events happened. I do know, or what I'd like to talk about, are sources within our tradition that invite us to reflect upon what have those experiences meant for us, how have they shaped us, and what have they meant for us as a people. But in terms of the ultimate why, that rests only with God. So the first example that I wanted to give, and in terms of empathy in the Torah, comes from a really tremendous shiur, a tremendous class that I heard from Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson, who's a contemporary Jewish scholar, and he brings the Gemara, Marty. He brings the Gemara in Tractate Brachot 7a, and this is a section of the Gemara that's talking about Moses encountering the burning bush. And when Moses encountered the burning bush, God, through an angel, called out to Moses from the midst of the burning bush and asked Moses to gaze upon God within the bush. And the text really is very striking, where it says that Moshe famously turned his face away and was afraid to look upon God. So, in the words of Rabbi Jacobson, this is perhaps one of the most profound spiritual experiences a human being could be offered. And Moshe seemingly says, no thanks, I'm too frightened, I'm not going to look. And it's the Gemara and then all the later Jewish commentators, there are so many, it's such a deep and obvious question as to what is going on, that it's engaged across, it's engaged by many, many commentators. And the Gemara in Brachot on page 7a gives two answers, and I want to focus on the second one. The first answer is that Moses was actually punished for not looking upon God. He had the chance to do it. He should have done it, and he did not do it. So when Moses wanted to look upon God later on in the Torah, God said, no, you're not going to be able to see, to see my face. I'm not going to permit it. When I wanted you to look, you didn't look. Now that you want to look, you're asking me to look, I'm not, it's not the right time. I'm not going to let you. The second answer, however, really goes to what we're talking about today. And the second answer is that Moshe did not only the right thing, but perhaps really the only thing that he could do. Why? So the Rabbeinu Bechaye, and the Rabbeinu Bechaye was a mystic and Torah scholar in medieval Spain. Rabbeinu Bechaye, in the section Parshat Shmot on the burning bush, points out that when God asked Moshe to look upon him in the burning bush, God used the name Elohim in the text, Elohim. Now, later on in Numbers and in Bamidbar, Rabbeinu Bechaye says, but wait a minute, later on, Moses did gaze upon God, and it says, L'tmunas Hashem Yabit. And on the image of God, Moses gazed upon the four-letter name of God, the Shem HaMeforash, a separate name of God. The Rabbeinu Bechaye says this is not random at all, because Elohim is a name of God that is associated with judgment, with holding humanity accountable. And Moses, when Moses was offered the opportunity to gaze upon the judgment aspect of God, Moses said no. What is going on here? So what happened is that Moses was offered an opportunity that has never been offered to another human being before or since. In Jewish tradition, we understand that Moses was actually offered an extraordinary opportunity. God said to Moses within the burning bush, I'm going to give you the chance to essentially answer Marlene's question. I'm going to give you the chance to look upon everything that has happened and will happen to the Jewish people, And I'm going to also give you the opportunity to see the plan that it fits into. In essence, I'm going to give you not just all of the what, but the why. I'm going to give you the opportunity to fully understand what's going to happen to the Jewish people. Moses said, no. How could any sane human being seemingly pass up such an opportunity? And here, Rabbi Jacobson brings what I think is such an incredibly important lesson for all of us as Jewish people. Moshe realized that if he alone within the Jewish people could see not only what was going to happen to them, but why, and would be able to understand the totality of God's plan and to understand, to be able to make sense of it on some level, Moses was indeed afraid. What he was afraid of was losing his full capacity for empathy with the people, because the people would remain frightened and confused. He alone would understand the why. So if for him, their troubles were clearly part of a plan and he could see how it all made sense, this would separate him from the people. Precisely at the time and in the way that they needed him the most. They needed a leader who would authentically feel their pain and confusion that they felt and be able to be with them as their leader, sharing that pain and confusion. Out of love for his people, for the Jewish people and for God, Moshe said, this is a choice that isn't a choice. I have to remain in empathy with my people. So you're offering me a chance to know something that I really shouldn't know. So no thanks. And by making that choice of empathy over that level of understanding, which was unequaled in history, the Rabbeinu Bechaye says God knew all the more that the choice of Moshe Rabbeinu for the leader of the Jewish people was indeed the right choice. And I'd like to end off the discussion of this source by pointing out, and I didn't want to go too far into the actual text and sort of get into the weeds, but this is something I really wanted to share. The Rabbeinu Bechaye brings something really fairly extraordinary, where he says that when God refers to God's being as Elohim, the Rabbeinu Bechaye says that's looking at God through an aspaklaria she'ena me'ira, which means a dull or cloudy lens. Looking at God as through the aspect of judgment is to see only a partial, a limited understanding of God. Now, when Moshe Rabbeinu looked upon God through the four-letter name of God, the Yud He Vav He, which is associated with love and compassion in Jewish tradition, the Rabbeinu Bechaye says these are the love and compassion are the loftiest, most holy aspects of God, associated in Kabbalah with the Ein Sof, the limitless nature of God. And this is looking upon God with an aspaklaria hameira, a clear lens, a much fuller understanding. So what that teaches me, or I should say, what that speaks to, how that speaks to my heart is, first of all, that love is a much deeper aspect of God than judgment, which as an Orthodox Jew, sometimes I felt that wasn't a natural feeling for me. That the deepest aspects of God are compassion, mercy, and love. And if we seek to understand God on the deepest possible level, that we should begin with that, as opposed to the aspects of God as judging us and potentially finding us wanting, God forbid. Any questions before we proceed further? Okay. So the second point, where do I see the emphasis on going beyond avoiding or negating harm? I wasn't sure how to put this, but that's the best words I could come up with the words in Tehillim, in Psalms. You have the famous expression in Psalms, Sur Me'ra ve'aseh tov. Sur Me'ra in Hebrew means to turn away from what is bad, turn away from evil, and do good. So there's a famous machlokas, there's a famous argument in Jewish tradition. How do we do this? Do we first have to completely sur me'ra before we can aseh tov? Do we have to first rid ourselves, completely do tshuva, completely repent, rid ourselves of anything that seems to be wrong or of anything that gets in the way of our relationship with God? Do we have to first sort of completely wash that out before we can get to moving towards health or to doing good? Or the first Ger Rebbe, a great Hasidic leader, it's called the Chidushei Arim, he said, no. He said, we should seek to simply do good. That if we're going to become obsessed, to use my word, obsessed with trying to get rid of anything imperfect or anything in the way or anything problematic within ourselves before we then think we're worthy of approaching God, well, we're never going to get out of that swampland. We're never going to progress. He said, if we can simply try to do good and be healthy and connect to God and connect to ourselves and connect to those we love, what is unhealthy, the Ger Rebbe, the Chidushei Arim said, would fall away. Now, which one is right is a whole nother shiur. And which one's going to work is a whole nother shiur. But that is the cultural and Torah backdrop of this whole discussion. Marty.
So is it that the Ger Rebbe holds that doing good by definition is avoiding bad, avoiding evil, or that you can do good in part while you still are erring and doing things that are not so wonderful? And those who don't hold that way, they feel it's not a dichotomy. It's not either good or evil, that there's something in between. So by avoiding evil, you're not, by definition, doing good.
So my understanding of this teaching when I first learned it in yeshiva in school was, well, it's a spectrum. It's you're going to have admixtures because no one does all, no one never makes mistakes or what have you. But the idea was always, and Ger as a Hasidic group, always was known for davening very fast. And the reason they gave was, well, if we daven quickly, we don't have time for other thoughts to come into our head to get distracted. So the idea was, if you're so busy doing good, you're not going to have room. You're not going to have space for doing evil. I'm not so sure that's entirely true, but that was, I think that's the backdrop of that statement. So I'd like to bring another Hasidic source and a favorite one of mine, and this is the Netivot Nesivis in my yeshiva Hebrew. The Netivot Shalom, the Nesivis Shalom. The Nesivis Shalom, which has been called a modern day Jewish philosophical classic, and I absolutely believe that it is, was the work of the Sluminer Rebbe, a Hasidic leader in Jerusalem. He was nifter, I believe, about 25 years ago. So he's very contemporary. The rabbi of my synagogue knew him and met him and knew him. And he wrote this multi-volume work called Paths of Peace, Netivot Shalom, talking about the Torah portion and the holidays and all sorts of just points of basic Jewish thought and philosophy. It's a fantastic, and parts of it have been translated to English. The Hebrew is very readable. It's just a wonderful, wonderful work. And the Nesivos Shalom, in talking about from the two parshas, Vayigash and Vayechi, at the end of Genesis, of Bereshis, talks about two promises that God makes to the Jewish people. One, Anochi Ered Imcha Mitzraymo. God is talking to Yaakov, to Jacob, and says, I will go down with you into Egypt, because Jacob was afraid to go down with his family into Egypt, this alien place. And God says to him, I will go down with you. And then there's a general promise of B'kol makom shegalu Yisrael shechina imahem, that in every place where the Jewish people have been and will be exiled, the Shechina, the divine presence, the aspect of God that is closest to us in this world, will always be with us, no matter how dark it seems to get. The Nesivos has a lot to say about exile. It's a favorite subject of his. One concept that he really brings forward is this concept of encountering God, not in spite of being in a place of seeming darkness and alienation and disconnection, but especially in such a place. Not on the source sheet, but I'll just bring up quickly. The Nesivos Shalom brings a midrash, that when Moshe Rabbeinu, when Moses went up Har Sinai, went up Mount Sinai to receive the Torah, Jewish tradition understands that he went through 3 levels of increasingly dark and thick clouds, of smoke, of clouds. And the darkest and thickest layer of darkness and clouds in Hebrew is called afela, which is still a modern Hebrew word for basically things being pitch black. You can't see absolutely anything. And the Nesivos here points out that the gematria, in the Hebrew alphabet, in the Aleph base, each Hebrew letter has a number. So when you look at a Hebrew word and you count up the numerical value of all the letters that contain that word, a word that has the same numerical value in Jewish tradition is often considered to have a connection to it, but just by virtue of having the same numerical values. Interestingly, the word afela, and please don't ask me to do the math, I was a history major for a reason, but the numerical value of afela in gematria is the exact same numerical value as Shechina, as the divine presence. So Moshe Rabbeinu encountered God in the deepest sense, in the fullest sense, not in spite of the darkness, and not even at the first or second layers of darkness. He encountered God in the deepest darkness of them all, and encountered God most directly. So that is a concept that Nesivos brings forth often and a lot, especially in his writings in Genesis and Bereshis. And we could be here all day with talking about those sources, and that would be a lovely, lovely way to learn together. But I'm going to talk about one idea that the Nesivos uniquely develops, that the patriarchs Yosef and Yaakov, Joseph and Jacob, represented 2 different madrigas, 2 different levels in Jewish spirituality. I had never seen this before when I saw it first in the Nesivos. So interestingly, he says that Yosef represents Torah, purity. And significantly, the Nesivos says purity is simply the sur me'ra, is turning away from evil. But it's avoiding the evil or negating the evil But that's really it. It's just simply staying separate from it. It's not engaging it. It's not encountering it. It's not dealing with it. It's staying apart from it. That certainly has value in Jewish spirituality, but that's one level. Yaakov, on the other hand, represents Kedusha, loosely translated in English as holiness. And the Nesivis says, what is holiness? This is the actual transformation of anything seemingly mundane into something holy, first and foremost by setting aside, this is the famous Rashi, where Rashi talks about how holiness first and foremost is to separate yourself from what is not permitted for us or not healthy for us spiritually. But the idea that holiness is when we mindfully set something aside for God or set something aside for a spiritual purpose, this is imbuing it, so to speak, or partnering with God to access the holiness inherent in it. And this is a higher level because this, in my estimation, because this goes beyond simply avoiding what is not good for us. This is encountering something and trying to pull out its fullest use and its essence, so to speak. And I was trying to think last night of a way to concretize this and to make this a little bit less abstract. And I thought to myself, well, okay, so eating in Jewish tradition. And I thought to myself, I wanted to think of something that uses the blessing shahakol. So I thought to myself, chocolate. So, okay. So if I eat a piece of chocolate by itself, which is a great idea and something I should do soon, that's wonderful. That's a snack. However, if I take that piece of chocolate and I say the blessing that is set for it in Jewish law and tradition, which is the blessing shahakol. So Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, blessed are you God, sovereign of the universe, shehakol nihiyeh bidvaro. These words are important. That everything comes into being or exists through God's word. That everything comes from God. So, and we're supposed to, many halakhic sources, Jewish legal sources say we should read blessings instead of just saying them out of our minds. Why? So that we really focus on the words and what they mean. So when I say this blessing before I eat a piece of chocolate, the idea, hopefully, is that I am transforming that piece of chocolate from a delicious snack. It remains a delicious snack, but it also becomes a vehicle that can draw us closer to God and can remind us of our own sacred essence, because in Hasidus and in Jewish tradition, our essence is our neshama, which is a piece of God, so to speak, a chelek Elokai mimal. So the holiness within that piece of chocolate and the holiness within us really is just a matter of distance. It's not really a matter of a different substance. So we're one with the chocolate in that moment. So what the heck does any of this have to do with resilience, chocolate and all? So the Nesivos Shalom says this many times, that we have to first contend with the fact that is certainly with the exile in Egypt, that was never meant as a punishment for the Jewish people. Could not have been. And that's for a very simple reason. Because he points out that the original 70 members of Yaakov's family, of Jacob's family that went down into Egypt, were universally understood in Jewish tradition as being tzaddikim, as being pure, holy, righteous Jews. Although as I was putting the final touches on this, I thought to myself, well, except for the selling of Yosef, but except for the selling of Joseph, which, we can get into that. But essentially, they certainly had not done anything, seemingly anything, that would mean that God would take them out of their home and put them in this alien, very hostile environment as a punishment for having done something wrong. So then what possibly could be the point of Gauls, of exile? And here the Nesivus is really bringing forth an idea that is very powerful and has been very powerful in my own life, both professionally and personally. The Nesivus says the Jewish people went into exile in Egypt, and here he is turning towards the Kabbalah, to Jewish mysticism. He says part of the reason why they went down into Egypt, beyond the obvious fact that God told them to, was to find and rectify, which means to return to their creator and to so partner with God to complete creation, the Nitzuzos de Kedusha, the holy sparks that in Kabbalah, the Kabbalah specifically of the Arizal of Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, when the universe was created, God poured light into the world, and light being energy, into the world. The vessels that were used shattered, couldn't contain all of this light, and those sparks scattered everywhere. So the whole purpose of human life, certainly of Jewish life, is essentially whatever we do and wherever we are, there are sparks that we can gather and rectify, that we can find the hidden holiness in everything, especially if we approach this mindfully and think this isn't just a piece of chocolate. This is a piece of chocolate that I believe Hashem created, and that through saying this blessing, I can then return that energy to its creator. We can help complete creation. We can create literally a better world. And in Kabbalah, this actually was the original meaning of Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam, an idea, a very important idea that my Orthodox brothers and sisters some of us have been learning from our non-Orthodox brothers and sisters. And it's a wonderful, wonderful idea, and we should do a lot more of it. At its deepest, though, it goes way beyond trying to make a more just world to trying to complete creation and to reveal the godliness present throughout the world. So in our own lives, we have the invitation, we have the possibility of finding these Nitzuzos de Kedusha, these sparks of holiness, of purpose, of meaning, wherever they may be, and we can see them as avenues of integration and growth whenever possible. So that was part of the reason why Yaakov's family had to go down into Egypt, because the Nesivos was trying to answer the eternal question. It says, there they will become a great nation. Well, why there? It's a terrible place. Why there? And the answer, according to Nesivos, was that those sparks were unique to Egypt and needed to be rectified. And all of us, I dare say, have our own private Egypts. How are we on time? Oh my goodness, we are getting short on time. So much that I still wanted to discuss.
In 2 minutes, I was going to give you the 5-minute warning.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. I wanted to bring one more Gemara source, and it's a short Gemara source, so I think it'll be something we can talk about, but its implications I think are tremendous for us as a people. And then I really want to have some time for questions, because what we just talked about was a lot. So the Gemara source is also Brachot, Tractate Brachot. This is 5b, and this is a famous Gemara where Rabbi Chia bar Abba, a student of Rabbi Yochanan, fell ill. And Rabbi Yochanan entered to visit him and said to him, and listen to these words. And the original words in the Hebrew are, Chavivan alecha yisurin, is your suffering dear to you? In other words, the suffering that you're undergoing. Not that we asked for it, not that I think you should have it, not that we want suffering, but there are hidden sparks within that suffering. There are potential lessons, there are avenues of growth within that suffering. You can choose to access those avenues of growth or not. And he asked them, do you desire this suffering to grow? Rabbi Chia says, no, I don't want the suffering and I don't want its reward. So then Rabbi Yochanan says to him, give me your hand. Rabbi Chia gave him his hand. Rabbi Yochanan stood him up and restored and healed him on the spot. Oh, pretty. I'd be out of a job as a chaplain. Now, in turn, Rabbi Yochanan fell ill. Rabbi Hanina, one of his other students, came to him and said, same question, is your suffering dear to you, to his teacher? Interesting, his teacher says to him, I welcome, no, I don't want the suffering. I don't want its reward. I don't want to be sick. Please heal me. And Rabbi Hanina says, give me your hand. And he stands his teacher up and he heals his teacher. The Gemara says, well, wait a minute. Why couldn't Rabbi Yochanan just heal himself? Why did he need a student who was on seemingly a lower level? Why did he need someone else to do this for him when he healed his other student by, seemingly by himself? And the answer is profound. The Gemara says, Ein chavush matir atzmo mibeis ha'asurim. A prisoner cannot generally free themselves from prison. We need other people to heal. As a general rule, we need other people to help us grow, to help us free ourselves from the prison of our own narrow, restricted understandings of ourselves. And if we want to heal and grow, we need people around us who can help us. And I want to finish very quickly with Erich Fromm, who was a psychoanalyst in the 20th century, originally an Orthodox Jew in Germany, later a Marxist psychoanalyst and philosopher who still learned Gemara every day, who famously taught that in his experience of psychoanalytic practice, it was vital to help patients understand themselves better and appreciate who they were, because then the natural instincts and paths for healing could start to take place. That there are natural healing aspects within the human psyche. And if we can learn to accept ourselves and love ourselves and to help others do the same, that there are natural pathways of healing that then become open to us. May the Torah we have learned today be a schus, be a merit for the Kedoshim, the holy ones who died so tragically on that fateful day. And may we all help each other to free ourselves from whatever prisons we may be in. May we all help each other both individually and as a people to find freedom. Thank you very, very much.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi Meadows, for your teaching today. And thank you to all the participants as well. We're going to close with the Kaddish D'Rabbanan led by Marty Gaynor, and I'm going to put the link to it in the chat right now. Oh, looks like Michal did it. Okay.
Thank
Marty?
you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi Meadows, Shkoyach, and Halavai. It should be so. Please please rise and join me in Kaddish D'Rabbanan, since we have just finished this Torah learning. Yisgadal v'yisgadash me rabah Rama divrach Yerusei v'yamlich malchusei v'chaye chayin v'yamei chayin v'chaye d'chol beis Yisrael v'agalav izman kuri v'yiru umin Yehi shmei Rabba mevarach l'olam l'mei amayah Yisbarach v'yishtabach v'yispa'ar v'yisrimam v'yisnaseh v'yisadar v'yisaleh v'yisalal shmei d'kudusha brichu Leila men kol birchoso v'shiraso tush bechoso v'nechumoso domiran v'yama v'imru umin All Yisrael, V'al Rabbanon, V'al Talmidei Hain, V'al Kol Talmidei Hain, V'al Kol Mun Daskin Bar Raisa, Di B'Yasra Hadain V'di B'chol Asar V'Asar, Yehe L'hain L'chain Shlomo Rabba, China V'chista V'rachame V'chai Areche, V'mazani V'viche, Ulfor Kona Min Kadum V'hain Dishmaya V'imru Umein, Yehe Shlomo Rabba Min Shmaya V'chain Tevim, Aleni V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Umein. Aiseh Shalom B'Ramav, Hu Yaseh V'Rachamav Shalom, Aleni V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Umein.
Amen. Shkoyach, Marty.